So I just wanted to touch on the whole Tommy Robinson saga again because I've been seeing so much nonsense and cheerleading of obvious state tyranny from people on the supposed rational and sane left, whatever is left of that. So a lot of people are saying that the arrest was legitimate, Tommy Robinson broke the law, and there's no issue. And anyone who is mentioning it or in opposition to it or complaining about it is basically being irrational, over emotional, ignoring the facts, etc., etc. And depending on who they're applying that to, is largely inaccurate. So I just grew tired of seeing it, and it was a particular issue in the Liberalists UK group on Facebook that I was a member of, and I defended Tommy Robinson. I still think the arrest and the charge and the prosecution was all bogus and all illegitimate. I don't think he broke the law. I think it was a political arrest and a political prosecution, and very few people, if anyone else, has the same standard applied. So Tommy Robinson suffered this because of who he is and because of his history of freedom advocacy and freedom fighting in terms of exposing the levels of police and government corruption and collusion in covering up Muslim child rape and just the other joys that we have from Islam and the Muslim community in the West, but particularly in Britain. So the state and the government and the powers that be have a 10-year history, pretty much, of persecution and harassment of Tommy Robinson. Now, a lot of these cheerleaders of tyranny have come out with ad hominem arguments referencing his criminal record. Now, if you go through much of his criminal record, I'd argue the majority of it are illegitimate and bogus charges and prosecutions, and he shouldn't have spent any time in jail. Some of them he was found guilty of. So the most obvious and clear one that he was clearly guilty of is traveling to America on his friend's passport. Obviously, that is a clear-cut case, and he was prosecuted on that, and I'm pretty sure he did jail time for that. And no one really argues that he didn't clearly break the law, that the law is a legitimate one, that isn't silly or unjust in any way. It's a clear, obvious law, and the law was applied directly, fairly, and consistently. The most famous example of him being shafted by the system and the state is the mortgage fraud charge. The police did an investigation on his entire family. They couldn't find anything on Tommy Robinson or most of his family, with the exception of one of his, I believe it was his cousin, who on a mortgage application form, he exaggerated the size, the amount of his annual income in order to qualify for the mortgage conditions. So this was his cousin, not him, exaggerating his annual income on a mortgage application form or something of that sort. And because they had nothing on Tommy Robinson, they nailed this charge to him because they were going to incarcerate, I believe, either his wife or someone else from his family, just in order to try and intimidate him into silence. So after much wrangling, Tommy decided that it was best to just accept the charge, even though it was bullshit, just to spare his wife and other family members jail or at least public exposure via the process of going into court and having a trial, etc. So he swallowed that. He pleaded guilty, I believe, or he accepted the conditions and he took the charge, and then he did the jail time for him. So when people reference his criminal history, and specifically stuff like that mortgage fraud conviction, so they'll say stuff like he's a convicted fraudster. No, not when you know the details of the case. You know that's complete horseshit. And anyway, that's ad hominem because it's not addressing his arguments and the things he says about pretty much anything. Islam, the grooming gangs, the state lies and persecution and collusion involving the police. It doesn't. It's not an argument or rebuttal to a single thing he says. It's a character assassination. So when people reference all these criminal convictions, it's like noise. It's not actually saying or doing anything. So here I've pulled up just two of multiple other prior publications relating to the case that Tommy was sentenced and prosecuted for reporting on. Now, the dates are up on the screen. You can see they're 2017 and they're from the Huddersfield Examiner. And you can see literally all of the details are there. And then the second one is the one on the 11th of May 2017 by Andrew Hurst, also of the Huddersfield Daily Examiner. And in this article, you can see they've embedded a video of the initial court appearance of the 29 accused people. Now, I'll link the article in the description and you can go and watch the video for yourself. But I've taken a few screen grabs from the video, and in it you can see the defendants or some of the defendants going into court, and they are flanked by a load of people. There's police officers and various members of the public, members of the press. Now, for those of you that are eagle-eyed, you'll notice Tommy Robinson there, also taking footage, taking pictures, and saying some stuff to the accused as they're going into court. Now, this is what the initial charge that garnered Tommy his bail conditions. This is where it comes from, this appearance where he turned up and filmed and verbally engaged the accused. So he was done on, I think, contempt of court for this. As you can see, there's multiple other people there taking footage, some on cameras, some on phones. And as far as I'm aware, not a single one of them was done on the same charge as Tommy and given a suspended sentence as Tommy was. So that's the first inconsistency in the law. Now, some may argue that none of those people said anything verbally to the accused, therefore they're not eligible for the charge of contempt of court. But I'd argue that that's not really a strong or valid argument or rebuttal. I think if the law is just and consistent, then anyone there should have been done on similar or the same charges. Now, as far as I'm aware, only Tommy, possibly one other person, as far as the court, that prosecution, I think only Tommy and one other person actually ended up being in court due to being present as shown in this picture and filming the defendants. No one else of the multiple others taking film or footage ended up in court for doing the same thing. So right from the bat, that is telling you that this is an iffy and questionable processing of the law on specific individuals, and it's not being consistently applied. So from that appearance, Tommy has this suspended sentence hanging over his head. So he turns up to the Leeds court to report, or let's be more technical, repeat already published information on the ongoing trial. Now, as I've shown, this information has already been previously published by the Huddersfield Daily Examiner. The information has also been published by a Leeds court where the trial and case took place. In the stream, he didn't say anything that wasn't already made public. So, again, critics would argue, but he was on a suspended sentence and there was a reporting restriction on the case, which is all very well and good, but It's the theatre of the absurd. It's like the analogy is this: there's a naked woman standing in the street, and then, say, 6 months later, she's still standing there, and a guy is in his house and he notices the woman standing there. But there's been a gag put on mentioning the fact that there's a naked woman standing outside in said location. So the guy cannot comment on the fact that there's a naked woman standing there, even though he's commenting on it after the fact, and he's commenting on it after multiple people have already seen that the woman's there. So it makes no logical sense to put any kind of post restrictions on an act once the information has been disseminated publicly, and, may I add, it's still publicly available. I've gone online today and found this information. So Tommy Robinson has stated already published information. Now, if the reporting restrictions are in place, surely these articles should be removed if they don't want to prejudice the trial. That's what the claim of the law and the prosecution and the tyranny cheerleaders is, that, oh, Tommy is endangering the process by stating already public and already published information. One, that doesn't make sense because even if he wasn't there, the information is already out there, it's already disseminated. So it's literally insane to make that argument. Then there's a second fact that it was divided into 3 trials, and again, this is all published. 2017 it was published. So it was divided into 3 trials. When Tommy Robinson was outside of the court repeating this information, the first trial had been concluded. That means it's literally impossible to prejudice it because the process has been concluded, it's finished, it's done. And the second of the 3 trials was in the process of being concluded. So he literally can't prejudice that either. The only argument and claim that can be made is that he may perhaps prejudice the third trial, which is yet to be conducted and is yet to be concluded. Now, this is also a bullshit non-argument because, unlike virtually 100% of the people commenting on this, they don't really know the British judicial process in terms of being a juror and appearing in court, and they don't know about the conditions that the jurors are subject to. Now, I have been a juror. I was asked to do jury service when I was 18 years old. I went to court, and you go and you have to agree, and I think you have to sign in agreement to a set of conditions and restrictions in terms of risking outside influence or prejudice of the trial. So when you are a juror on a case like this, you are not allowed to be consuming any social media or any media, radio, TV, internet, websites, etc. You are not allowed to look at or consume anything that could be seen to prejudice the trial. You're banned from it. So it is literally impossible that any of the jurors involved in the third ongoing trial, it's impossible that any of them would have been sat there, particularly on court premises, with their phone, watching a Tommy Robinson live stream. It's fucking asinine to suggest that this is a legitimate risk that the trial will be prejudiced, because the jurors, in consuming media, especially social media, they're violating the conditions that they've agreed and signed up to. So they won't even be seeing this. So that, again, is a non-argument. And it's just everyone who's supporting this, it's a mixture of ignorance, and it's a mixture of just some bias against Tommy Robinson. They don't really like Tommy Robinson, and they think it's legitimate what has happened to him. And I mean, I've spoken before already on the fact that this is tyrannical, something that the regimes in Russia and China and Saudi Arabia would do. So again, just for those who haven't heard me say this or who aren't aware of what happened, he was arrested on a bogus charge of breaching the peace. Now, there was no breach of the peace. The judge that oversaw his eventual prosecution on a separate charge oversaw the alleged breach of the peace, and then he continued to judge the prosecution, which is illegal. The judge isn't supposed to bear witness to something with a defendant or an accused perpetrator and then oversee prosecution or a case involving the same person. So the judge shouldn't have even been allowed to oversee the prosecution. So that's the second thing. Thirdly, they rushed through in pretty much an unprecedented time frame. They rushed through the prosecution and the sentencing. I think it was something like 4 hours in total. So he was arrested, prosecuted, and imprisoned in 3 to 4 hours, which is pretty much unheard of. And in that process, they denied him his own legal representative. They lied to his defense and his legal representation, saying that he had been released when he hadn't been released. And then they appointed him another lawyer who obviously isn't as familiar with his history and isn't or wasn't a specialist on contempt of court issues. Now, some anonymous law guy, I forget the name, but he made a fucking stupid justification article or piece saying that the representative that Tommy was appointed was highly respected and very good and very experienced, etc. Yeah, he may be very experienced, he may be very good, but he's not a contempt of court specialist. That's not his area of expertise. So they gave him this lawyer who recommended and advised Tommy to plead guilty on these charges in the belief that Tommy would perhaps receive a fine or a minimal sentence, nothing like the 13 months that he eventually got. So that was another bit of tyranny. And then, after this was rushed through, the judge proceeded to put a gag order on the entire British press and mainstream media from even reporting on the case. So they tried to make Tommy Robinson disappear, essentially, just ghost him. Just 1 minute he's there, next minute he's incarcerated, and they wanted to prohibit anyone from mentioning it or highlighting it. So this is Stasi tactics, this is fascistic tactics, this is tyranny, this is unjust from top to bottom, and there's no defense of it. And that so-called adherence of the principles of liberalism are cheerleading not only the arrest but the conduct of the state is absolutely astounding to me. And yeah, I had multiple clashes with people in the UK Liberalists Facebook group, and that ended up in me being kicked out of the group because I don't know, too much diverse opinion. I suppose I was too forceful in my defence of Tommy Robinson. So here we are. Tommy Robinson is still imprisoned. I think they're still fucking him over by not granting him visitor access. I think his family were told that they'd be allowed to visit, and then it was changed, and just the usual stuff that they do to him. All illegitimate, all unjust. Yet it continues. So he's in prison as it stands, and he's likely to serve most of, if not his entire sentence. I don't think he'll be let out early, and if he is let out early, he'll be gagged from speaking on it. I'm pretty sure. So he won't be doing any more of his media work on anything really. So this is a state of play at the moment, and also I don't think he has had access to his actual legal team and legal representation yet, and they're still fucking him over in that regard as well. The whole thing is a mess and it cannot be defended, and yet people who claim to stand for certain principles are arguing against their own principles just because of who this has happened to, which, yeah, it's full of shit, but there you go.